During the crisis years of 268 to 284, Rome had a total of 11 emperors. That so many men claimed the purple during a 16-year period is indicative of the empire's profound disorder. With some reigns measured simply in months, and others in mere days, it was probably difficult for provincials on the far-flung frontiers to keep track of who their princeps was. But, even in this period of chaos, there was a small thread of consistency. 7 of these 11 men bore some variation of the name Marcus Aurelius. But before you name your son Marcus Aurelius, thinking you can channel some auspicious nominative predeterminism to ease his path to greatness, we must look at why there was such a rapid succession of Marcus Aureliuses, especially since this run began 88 years after the death of the Marcus Aurelius. Many of the men who occupied the throne during this chaotic period belonged to a group of military strongmen known as the Illyrian emperors, because they had roots not in Italy, or even in the western provinces, but in the highly militarized Danube region that was home to some of Rome's most elite legions. Unsurprisingly, a period of civil war and political tumult eased the accession of those with armies to command, and the generals on the Balkan frontier adapted better to the new reality where legitimacy was won at sword point and not derived from a grand lineage of aristocratic ancestors. In fact, so lacking was their ancestry that they were among the first in their families to even call themselves citizens. Before 212, Roman citizenship had been a mark of privileged distinction, though it had expanded ever outward from the city itself since the days of Romulus. Outside of Italy, citizenship was typically a mark of elite status or connections. All of this changed with the stroke of a pen in 212, when the emperor Marcus Aurelius Antoninus, or Caracalla as he is commonly known, extended the full rights and privileges of Roman citizenship to nearly every free man in the empire. Though Romans did not guard their citizenship as closely as the Greek city-states, this gesture of universality was still unprecedented, and in gratitude the newly enrolled citizens followed Roman convention and adopted names integrating the praenomen and nomen of the man who had given them the great honor of citizenship. Marcus Aurelius was now among the most common names in the empire, so much so that it became difficult for the descendants of the ancient Aurelian clan to distinguish themselves from all these newcomers. The document that welcomed so many new members into the Roman civic community is known as the Antonine Constitution, and it is no understatement to say that it fundamentally and irrevocably altered the Roman Empire, shifting definitions in the legal, military, and financial spheres. It has also been a critical influence on Western ideas of citizenship and civic belonging in the 1800 years since it was promulgated, meaning that those interested in understanding the root of issues that prove so divisive today can benefit from a deeper look at Caracalla's momentous decision and his underpinning rationale. For unfortunately, our current understanding of the exact language of the law and its mechanics is still not absolute. Miraculously, a Greek translation of the Constitution has been preserved in the Giessen Papyrus, but damage to this document makes sections unclear. In addition, our surviving sources pertaining to the reign of Caracalla are deeply hostile, making it difficult to discern his motivations. The extension of citizenship, which seems to us a benevolent gesture, an act of unparalleled humanity and universality, is denigrated in Cassius Dio, for example, with any higher purposes excluded from his retelling, and Caracalla making this grant seemingly so he could tax his subjects more efficiently. He made all the people in his empire Roman citizens. Nominally, he was honoring them, but his real purpose was to increase his revenues by this means, inasmuch as aliens did not have to pay most of these taxes. Dio's biases are well known, and we should not accept him uncritically here. But what then was Caracalla's rationale for this radical new policy? Given the role that the Antonine Constitution has played in shaping Western notions of citizenship in the ensuing centuries, this is worth examining in greater detail to discover if we have here an inkling of universal human rights, or if realpolitik machinations are behind the edict. If you're enjoying this video, please do us a favor by liking, commenting, and subscribing. We're a small channel, and this is the only way to get the almighty YouTube algorithm to notice us. Furthermore, you can help Tribunate become more sustainable by becoming a member for as little as 99 cents a month. Thank you for all of your support. Unsurprisingly, given his autocratic rule and violent nature, few would hold to the idea of Caracalla as embracing liberal humanitarian thinking in his propagation of the Antonine Constitution. Scholars have put forward a range of explanations, including patron-client dynamics, religious devotion, financial security, and the need to cultivate ideological support for his regime. Like all men, Caracalla was shaped by his times and material conditions, though as an emperor he had more latitude in shaping the reality in which he operated. There were still innumerable influences and antecedent factors that he had no control over. Thus, in my opinion, it is at best misguided and at worst a complete waste of time to seek a monocausal explanation for his decision. Despite being named after Marcus Aurelius, Caracalla was hardly a philosopher, and can more accurately be characterized as a hedonistic brute, in the mold of Aurelius's son Commodus. But, even with a dim bulb such as this, the human mind is still endlessly complex, and we reduce Caracalla to a caricature at our own peril. Creating a one-dimensional creature of our own imagination only makes our creation easier to understand. But this has no relation to the actual man who once walked the earth. In recognition of this tremendous hurdle, and the obstacles present as we try to discern motivations across time and space through unfriendly sources, I would like to present a handful of factors that play into my reconstruction of Caracalla's decision to extend citizenship across the empire. For me, the natural place to start is in self-preservation. The goal of any regime is to perpetuate itself. This is true even in the best of times, and Caracalla did not govern at the best of times. The need to secure his place atop the empire becomes clear when we consider the sequence of events that led to his rise, and also remember that he was ultimately unsuccessful, and he was felled by a conspiracy, as several emperors in recent memory had been. Caracalla's position was uniquely precarious, because he had killed his younger brother and co-emperor Geta in 211, less than a year into their joint reign. Since many soldiers and athletes, therefore, were guarding Geta, both abroad and at home, day and night alike, Antonius induced his mother to summon them both, unattended, to her apartment, with a view to reconciling them. Thus Geta was persuaded, and went in with him. But when they were inside, some centurions, previously instructed by Antonius, rushed in a body and struck down Geta, who, at the sight of them, had run to his mother, hung about her neck, and clung to her bosom and breasts, lamenting and crying, "Mother that didst bear me! Mother that didst bear me! Help! I am being murdered!" And so she, tricked in this way, saw her son perishing in the most impious fashion in her arms, and received him at his death into the very womb, as it were, whence he had been born. For she was all covered with his blood, so that she took no note of the wound she had received on her hand. But she was not permitted to mourn or weep for her son, though he had met so miserable an end before his time. He was only 22 years and 9 months old. But, on the contrary, she was compelled to rejoice and laugh, as though at some great good fortune. Geta was of course no better than Caracalla, but fratricide was frowned upon by the Romans. even if Caracalla could plead that he was merely emulating the great Romulus. Joint reigns were at this point still uncommon, but had happened before, ironically during the reign of Marcus Aurelius, when he shared power with Lucius Verus from 161 to 169, and with Commodus from 177 to 180. This made Caracalla the first emperor to murder his colleague, and our sources indicate that he went on a PR offensive to paint his coup as an act of self-defense against a brother who had been plotting to take his life. The emperor spent that night in the temple in the Praetorian camp. Then, growing bold because he had won over the soldiers by gifts, he came from the Senate house accompanied by the entire guard, which was more heavily armed than was customary for the imperial escort. After he had gone in and offered sacrifices, Caracalla mounted the imperial throne and addressed the senators as follows. I am not unaware that every murder of a kinsman, immediately the deed is known, is despised, and that the name kinsman killer arouses harsh censure as soon as it falls upon the ear. Pity follows for the victims, hatred for the victors. In such cases it appears that the victim is abused, the victor abusing. But if one were to consider the deed with sober judgment, and not with sympathy for the fallen, and if he were to evaluate the victor's motive and intent, he would find that sometimes it is both reasonable and necessary for the man about to suffer an injury to defend himself, and not stand passively and submit. Censure for cowardice follows when a man succumbs to disaster, but the winner gains, together with his safety, a reputation for courage. As to the rest, all the plots he laid against me, using deadly poisons and every kind of treachery, these you can discover by the use of torture. For this reason, I issued orders for Geta's servants to be present here, so that you may learn the truth. Caracalla had thus not simply seen an emperor's life cut short. He had participated in the act, and so knew the relative ease with which it could be accomplished. In addition, he was certainly aware that his father was the only imperial claimant in over 3 decades who had died peacefully, of natural causes. But even though his father, Septimius Severus, had been a successful emperor, his own claim had been tenuous at best. Hence his orchestration of a fraudulent posthumous adoption by Marcus Aurelius, to claim a dynastic link with the fondly remembered princeps. He caused us special dismay by constantly styling himself the son of Marcus and the brother of Commodus, and by bestowing divine honors upon the latter, whom but recently he had been abusing. While reading to the Senate a speech in which he praised the severity and cruelty of Sulla, Marius, and Augustus as the safer course, and deprecated the mildness of Pompey and Caesar as having proved the ruin of those very men, he introduced a sort of defense of Commodus, and inveighed against the Senate for dishonoring that emperor unjustly, in view of the fact that the majority of its members lived worse lives. It is for this reason that Caracalla bore the name Marcus Aurelius at all, and therefore the ubiquity of the name in later generations is a pure accident of history, since the family links were entirely fictional, and quite literally forged through political pragmatism. As both the son of a provincial general who had taken the purple through civil war, and as a regicide in his own right, Caracalla was not popular with the senatorial class, and understood the need to quickly shore up support from other societal stakeholders. He sought to do this first by following his father's advice and winning over the army, but also by significantly expanding his clientship base, building on the patronage system that undergirded all aspects of Roman society. The citizenship grant allowed him to accomplish both. Dio was not wrong to speculate that financial considerations were at play. By extending citizenship to millions across the empire, Caracalla also made them eligible for new taxes. It is often assumed that this was a measure he took to shore up state finances as a whole and put the empire on more solid footing. But we must emphasize that despite the inflation-driven economic crisis which was to follow in the next several decades, the economic system was not yet in freefall. Caracalla had debased the currency and was short on needed cash, but the empire was still humming along rather well. He needed money not to keep the state afloat, but to offer greater financial incentives to the army to keep them loyal to him personally. Having succeeded in the murder, Caracalla ran from the room and rushed throughout the palace, shouting that he had escaped grave danger and had barely managed to save his life. He ordered the soldiers who guard the imperial palace to protect him and escort him to the praetorian camp, where he could be safely guarded, saying that if he remained in the imperial palace, he would be murdered. Unaware of what had happened inside, the soldiers believed him and ran with him as he dashed ahead at full speed. Consternation seized the people when they saw the emperor speeding on foot through the middle of the city in the early evening. Rushing into the camp and into the temple where the standards and decorations of the guards were worshipped, Caracalla threw himself on the ground. In the chapel, he gave thanks and offered sacrifices for his safety. When this was reported to the praetorians, some of whom were in the baths, while others were already asleep, they hurriedly assembled in amazement. When he appeared before them, Caracalla did not immediately reveal what had happened. Instead, shouting that he had escaped the deadly plots of an enemy and rival, he identified his assailant as his brother. He cried out that he had with difficulty emerged victorious after a severe struggle with his enemies. But when he and his brother had put everything at stake, fortune had chosen him as sole emperor. His motive in thus distorting the facts was his desire to have them hear from him what had happened, rather than from someone else. In gratitude for his deliverance, and in return for the sole rule, he promised each soldier 2,500 denarii, and increased the ration allowance by 1/2. He ordered the praetorians to go immediately and take the money from the temple depositories and the treasuries. In a single day, he recklessly distributed all the money which Severus had collected and hoarded from the calamities of others over a period of 18 years. When they heard about this vast amount of money, although they were aware of what had actually occurred, the murder having been made common knowledge by fugitives from the palace, the praetorians at once proclaimed Caracalla emperor and called Geta enemy. Note that this bonus comes after his father had already significantly raised pay for the legions. The edict was thus a granting of symbolic power and rights to the inhabitants of the empire, so that he could pay off the people who actually gave him the right to rule. Furthermore, by erasing a key marker of class and privilege, Caracalla was striking a blow at the traditional senatorial elite, who had been uneasy with his father's reign and who may potentially plot against him as well. Though real social distinctions would of course still exist, the leveling effect of the Antonine Constitution further weakened a Senate that was already bordering on pure irrelevance. Whether we want to label the higher degree of equality in Roman society as a move to lower the Senate or raise the populace depends on how charitable we want to be towards Caracalla. But the end result was the same. An honor long cherished by so many, now socially signified very little. It was a stark reminder of where power actually lay and who could be offended. A clique of self-important aristocrats made an easy punching bag, but the legions were to be respected at all costs. In addition to reaffirming the legions as his clients, the Antonine Constitution also placed the millions of new citizens it generated under personal bonds of obligation to the emperor as their patron. The ever-present patron-client dynamic is one of those facts about Roman life that is easier to know than it is to understand. I've published an episode on patronage for a deeper look at this topic, but it must be stressed that Roman culture was thoroughly hierarchical, and that the bonds of patronage and clientship touched all aspects of life, and that the new citizens would have felt deep personal gratitude towards Caracalla. In one act, he had done more to deliver tangible benefits to their lives than most emperors accomplished across their entire reigns. There was thus an expectation that they repay this act of beneficence however they were able, and they would have been happy to do so. One action they could take to show their appreciation for the emperor was perhaps to enlist in the legions, an option open to them now as citizens. Even with high pay and benefits, Rome struggled during this period to enroll adequate numbers of citizen soldiers. By extending citizenship, Caracalla had eliminated this problem and created extra incentives for those soldiers to support him personally. Another way that these new citizens could support his regime was through prayers and offerings. While I have so far attempted to focus on the material, political concerns driving Caracalla, it would be an oversight to exclude the religious dimension, not least because to the Romans the spiritual sphere was every bit as real and efficacious in securing a regime as were concrete policies. Caracalla himself viewed the citizenship grant as a divinely inspired act, presenting the edict in overtly religious terms, and as a move to bring harmony back to an empire torn asunder by his brother's alleged misdeeds. The Emperor Caesar Marcus Aurelius Severus Antoninus Pius decrees, "It is altogether necessary to attribute the causes and reasons of recent events to the divine. I personally would rightly thank the immortal gods, since although such a conspiracy as that of Geta has occurred, they have watched over me and protected me. I think that I am able, both magnificently and piously, to do something fitting to the gods' majesty, if I manage to bring all those in the empire who constitute my people to the temples of the gods as Romans." It is no surprise to see the Roman emperor presenting himself as a unique arbiter of Rome's relationship with the gods, but Caracalla's need to solidify support for his one-man rule made his efforts to demonstrate divine backing quite overt. But furthermore, by making his edict a pious one meant to ensure lasting divine favor, he was letting the newly enrolled citizens know that a successor would struggle to claw back his gift. It is in the religious realm that we can perhaps glean what Caracalla envisioned as the higher purpose in his edict. While the material factors mentioned earlier are of course to be given primacy, as they remain easier to assess, very rarely does the human mind permit us to appraise our own actions as operating under purely base concerns. Rather, we assign grander narratives and meaning to all we do, and Caracalla certainly felt that his edict was more than just a mechanism to secure his own power. After all, regardless of whether it was true or not, he would have constructed a mental framework that rationalized his own claim to power, making it just, divinely sanctioned, and for the benefit of all Rome. We are all the heroes of our own stories, something that is also certainly true of a Roman emperor. So here I will diverge slightly from what can be inferred from sources alone and offer my own reconstruction of what Caracalla felt he was accomplishing. This is grounded in evidence, but it does go beyond the evidence. If you agree or disagree with my conjecture, please let me know in the comments. In my view, Caracalla was attempting to consciously emulate his idol, Alexander the Great. Caracalla's admiration for Alexander is well documented. He copied his style of dress and even ordered Roman soldiers to train in the outdated Macedonian phalanx formation that had brought Alexander such success, but was at odds with modern Roman military doctrine. Caracalla even waged war against Parthia in the hopes of reclaiming Alexander's lost empire. But it was not only in military matters that he was impressed by Alexander. Caracalla wanted to embody Alexander's spirit of Hellenism, and in my opinion, it was Alexander's budding ideas of universalism that influenced the Antonine Constitution. It is necessary for the masses not only to share in our burden, but also to be included in victory. This decree will spread the magnificence of the Roman people, for it now happens that the same greatness has occurred for everyone, by the honor in which the Romans have been preeminent since time immemorial, with no one from any country in the world being left stateless or without honor. By unifying the Roman Empire under a coherent code and placing all freeborn men, regardless of background, on theoretically level footing, Caracalla believed he was channeling the ambition of Alexander. In his mind, the ability to see this and bring it to fruition made him the true heir of Alexander and worthy of the throne. But at peace and at war, Caracalla was no Alexander. His efforts to conquer Parthia would lead to his own undoing at the hands of his Praetorian guards and the crowning of Macrinus. But, though Caracalla was among the most sadistic and depraved emperors Rome produced, the Antonine Constitution would go down as one of the most consequential policy decisions ever made by any Roman. Though the rights of a republican citizen had atrophied, there were concrete benefits associated with citizenship, and, even if acting from impure motives, Caracalla had improved the lives of millions. Perhaps unknowingly, he had also revitalized the state by clearing the path to advancement for the Illyrian emperors mentioned at the start of the video, and eventually men such as Aurelian and Diocletian, who would reunify and strengthen Rome after decades of crisis. As part of his plan to save Rome, Diocletian selected as one of his co-emperors a man who, like him, had risen from humble origins in Illyria and distinguished himself through competence, not a blue-blooded aristocratic lineage. That man was Constantius Chlorus, and his heir was his son Constantine, the Roman emperor who would forever change the world.